Parents who took out time today on Saturday morning to join Tracy Fisher. She is place 7 at COPEL Board of Trustees. So we welcome you, Tracy. And
School board members are we have more school board members in the country than we do any other elected official. And in Texas, that's approaching 8,000 elected officials that are school board members. And a lot of our state legislators began as school board members. School board members are governing bodies. So we're trustees, we're not representatives. And that's really an important concept difference, because the idea is that you're entrusted by your community to make the decisions for the children and your district. And you do your work based upon, the district surveys to find out how people feel about things. We involve our community on district committees and even board committees. Like we have a bond oversight committee that we recruited folks to come and work on and serve on that. So the bottom line is the board's role is to serve as a community member who has knowledge about what the community wants. And then based on the information they get, because we're dealing with students and we're dealing with teachers and, and land and other things. And some of this is confidential information. At the board level, I would never hear about your son, Monika, ever as an individual child, unless they were doing something super great. I would never hear about a problem there would be, or a child's, any deficit at all that a child had with respect to learning. I wouldn't hear the detail of that. That's not my job. And I wouldn't know what to do with that, right? I'm not an educator. And I don't ever want to be around a place where I had to educate children. That's not my thing. I was in business, and I'll tell you about my background real quick. But anyway, so we have one employee, that's a superintendent, and ours is Dr. Hunt, and then we set the budget every year. So we approve a budget. The staff develops the budget for us. We ask questions. We get things changed. We want to know more. We want to hear the back, et cetera. But we actually approve the budget. Now, the budget comes tax rate. So we also approve the tax rate. And so there are two different tax rates. There's one for maintenance and operation, which is your teacher salaries, what you need to run in a year. And 82% of that is teacher or, salary for our staff. We have a lot of people that work in education. Then the other fund is bond money. And that's what you use to build your buildings. That's actually, because we're a Robin Hood district, which is the district that actually gives extra money to the state. I'll explain that in a minute. We put everything we can as a school board that is over 5 years of life into our bond. So we buy buildings, we buy HVAC systems, we buy new roofs, we buy land, we buy buses, we buy instruments, student instruments, we buy band uniforms, we will buy our iPads, we buy everything that we can. And then what's good about that is we don't spend 30 years paying off the money we paid for the iPads. I mean, that would be ridiculous. They'd be gone in 5 to 7 years, and we wouldn't. I mean, that would be silly to keep paying for something that's long gone. So our bond, the way we pay for things is we pay for the buildings over a 25, 30 year, although they're built to last 75 years or whatever, although it doesn't seem like it with all the flooding, but that was very unusual. But so we would never, so that's what's used to pay over long term. The longest term bonds are for the buildings and things that last a long time. So the beauty of that is that the people that move in, like everybody, in your campus, I mean, well, not everybody. I mean, some folks are from Valley Ranch and some people are from, other parts of the area, but everybody there, no matter how new your building is, you're contributing to that tax rate. And so we've done a really good job. We just did I think it was about a 5 million, we think it's about a 5 million reduction in our bond payments that we're going to get, saving the taxpayer that much money. And what that does is it extends that money so that we can use it for other things before going out for another bond, which would probably raise your taxes some money. So we work really hard with experts that are experts on those things, to stay in touch and aware of what's going on with the markets, sets a tax rate, approves a budget, and hires or fires the superintendent. Those are our big jobs. Another thing that school board members do is they advocate, because of course, a lot of the work we do, it's really important that we are at the state level, because at the state level is where they're deciding what they're going to do to us the next year. And so we're trying to do the best thing we can for kids. Profound deep learning. CUPEL's worked so hard on making it about the whole child and not just about their academics. You know, we want kids that come out, we were talking earlier, with empathy and agency and problem solving abilities, and not just stuffing stuff in their head that goes out their other ear, within 2 weeks, depending on what it is. As board members, we do board walks. We get opportunities to work on committees as board liaisons. And that gives us a lot of insight to what's going on, and we can ask a lot of questions. Common is we're all very passionate about high quality public education, and we've got a great board.
Thank you, Archana. And Tracy, the question that we have for you is, what is the impact PTO has on school education, and the impact of PTO on community and health of the school is the topic that we would like you to throw some more light on.
In the state of Texas and beyond, actually, I said earlier that we were set up as independent school districts, and the thought is that your community matters. And they said they want to set up an efficient education. And so what I would tell you is that there is nothing more important than parents being involved in the schools, hands down. There are districts around here where people are not involved in their schools, and that does impact the children's education. 11 elementary schools. And really, PTOs are real hands-on in elementary. As the kids get older, there are less needs. The teachers don't want you in the classrooms, really, because their classrooms go fast and they need to be there and do their thing. So parents don't really volunteer in classrooms there. And then at the high school level, it's all about graduation, project graduation. You're doing things to get ready for the future, but where you do things in the high school is booster clubs and things like that. When your child's in theater or they're in choir or whatever, you do that kind of thing. But really, PTOs at the elementary level, it provides the school a little leg up. PTOs, as a parent, I tell you what I got out of the PTO is I got an opportunity to walk into that school and see what was going on. And I don't mean to sit in the classroom and watch everything. I mean, as a copy mom, and I mentioned this earlier, I looked to see what was being copied. I was curious about what are they having them sit and do, and it just builds camaraderie and community and pride, and you do anything for your kid's school, and you can tell a school where you've got a strong PTO. And I would tell you, Canyon Ranch is like, oh my gosh, what a place.
Can you give us an example during your time when you served as a PTO board member? What is one important, lesson that you learned, or why do you think that it's important to be part of PTO and volunteer and give your time to the school?
Well, I think that it's important to know what that school needs. I think it's important to know how to best support the work. In my mind, the most important people we have are our educators, and they're the ones that are touching our children, right? And I don't mean I mean figuratively, or maybe they're hugging them, which is fine. You want the little ones being hugged, but it's really important for them to have what they need, their needs met. we talk about social emotional issues and concerns, and the pandemic has been a horrible time for that. The teachers, just think about it. I mean, they've got their own kids that are suffering through this. Plus, then they're at work and they're teaching their kid. You know what I mean? It's just, I worry so much about our educators and being supported. And for me, it's what I learned was that this was a selfless thing to do, to give this time to the school in a way that helped make their days better. And it was important to me not to be a person that just showed up when there was a problem. I wanted to develop relationships, and I wanted to understand the work, because I was curious about whether it had changed too much from when I was in school, but I had a different perspective. When I was in school, I was the kid, not the teacher, or not the parent. So anyway, I just wanted to best support my kids and best support their teachers. And really, you see the big picture when you're on the PTO board, and when you're and when you're volunteering in the school, you get to hear and see. And it's just a relationship, it's a community, and it's vital. And when Texas set it up for community-based schools, where independent school districts, that just was a natural flow from that. And I really think that structure set that up.
Welcome everyone. For everybody that just joined in here recently, we are in conversation with Tracy Fisher. She is a Coppell ISD Board of Trustees, and we've been talking and touching on a lot of topics. Thank you so much for giving us your time on a Saturday. We hope to cover a lot of topics, that a lot of questions that have come in through our parents. We've compiled some questions, so we would like to go through this quickly, so that if your questions are not answered, please let the PTO know. We will approach Tracy via email, or that way she will have an opportunity to respond to those questions at a later time and date if it's not covered today here. And this session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel for you to view at a later time. So with that being said, Tracy, I know you covered on this and touched on this a little bit, but I want to ask this to you again, for those of us who just joined earlier, later on in this session here. And briefly, could you please explain the role the government plays in funding our schools, and what is the latest news on the Hill, so to speak, in our from Austin, I guess, because you represent us there.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we've got a very strange legislative session. Today is day 92 of our legislative session, and there's only 140 days total, and that's for every 2 years. So they won't meet again to make decisions until 2023. But what they do is really important. They do set the funding for us. There's an appropriations committee that does that, and that they do a biennium set. So you get so much this year and so much the next year. And of course, there are formulas built in, and I mentioned earlier, it has to do with how much, what your kid makeup is, and how much support they need in their learning. They also give a lot of extra credit, or not credit, extra weighting for career and technology education, CTE, and that's a big focus with the government right now. But so they have an appropriations committee, and really there's only, the only thing they have to do in a session is pass the budget. Just like we have to pass the budget every year, they have to pass the budget, and that has to go through the appropriations committee. And so there are lots of committees in the legislature. Their biggest budget item is education. And so there's education committee in both houses, or in both the House and the Senate. And they meet, and sometimes they have the same bills that are just somebody else authored them. One's from the Senate, one's from the House. And so they meet, they take testimony, they hear from the public, and then they make decisions about which bills they think should move on. In a typical session, there'll be 8,000 bills, and not all of them will be education bills. Typically, there could be 500-600 of those, 700 that are education bills, but they have to process those things. Just because they're not an education bill doesn't mean they don't impact us. So there are other committees that meet. The State of Affairs Committee, they talk about things like elections. They talk about, they look at there is a thing going on right now where they're looking at censuring community voice through by not allowing cities, counties, and school boards to advocate through another body. So like, for example, the Texas Association of School Boards, the legislative work that I participate on, we develop an agenda, and it's developed at a grassroots level where you have people from every school district saying, this is what's important to me. This is what's important to me. They get together in regions. We have 20 regions around the state. We're in region 10. They get together in regions. They say the things that they think are most important. Then they take all those 20 regions. They look for all the comparisons to see, okay, where is it like, whatever, which ones have the most votes. Then they prioritize this list. Then they bring in these representatives from each of those regions to get in a big meeting and decide which ones are the things that we really want to fight for. And so it rolls up, and then they have a delegate assembly and people vote. And so it's a big, long process. Well, what this bill that they're proposing would do is they would say we can't use any kind of taxpayer funds to lobby for education or for cities or for counties. Now think about that. Who else is lobbying? Gas companies, charter schools, big money, privatization effort. Those are the people that are lobbying them. And if that's all they hear about, and that's the money they get because the lobbyists pay them money, what are they going to vote for? And who's going to take care of the people? Well, the school board members, the city council people, the mayors, the county commissioners, the county judges. And so we view this truly as a community censorship bill. And there's one in the House, one in the Senate right now. And we are hoping that neither one of these will pass, but they will go through the State Affairs Committee. So that's a different committee. We look at education, but we also have to look at these other areas. There's a calendars committee. In order to get anything to the floor of either body, you have to have it go through the calendars committee to be scheduled. So there's a big, long process. So the 140 days, all this work gets done. They file the bills, 7,000 of them. Then they get beat up on and hear words and testimony. Really, the state capitol is where bills go to die, because most die there. They don't get passed. But they might come up again another year, which is, in this case, with this one bill with the community censorship, that is one that came up last time, and now it's got priority for the lieutenant governor he just announced. So we basically watch. TASB has a GR staff, a very small staff. TASB as an organization provides school districts with so much opportunity to save money that we don't have to spend. They have a common buy board group, so they can coordinate buying buses, and you get a better deal. They have a group that does risk management. So that storm we had last week that had affected 15 of our facilities, that one instance is going to be a $10,000 deductibles for the entire district. It's not per campus, it's one event. So that saved our district so much money if we had been insured in a different way. So they just do a lot. They have a lot of services like that support us. And so we pay very little of a fee to belong to TASB. And it depends on how big your district is. It's not that much. And I can't remember what it is this year. I mean, it's nominal compared to what we save by being part of TASB. And their their government relations people, just a few people, that doesn't, I mean, it doesn't cost us anything. They're helping us and the process they go through. So they watch the bills, and I watch bills. You can watch bills anytime you want. You just go onto the legislative website, and you can write in charter or funding, school funding, or you can write in education or whatever, and it'll list all the bills, who filed them, where they are in the process, and then you can go from there. I called a state rep's office the week before the power hit, because there is one bill that we are really interested in Coppell. The way it was originally written, that's the other thing, is they write a bill, it looks great, you support it, and then all of a sudden they add a rider to it, or they change it up in some way, and now you don't support it. So, I mean, that kind of stuff happens. It's like sausage making. It's really, really bad, or it can be bad. So you play a lot of defense when you're there. But so they can definitely affect us. There's another piece to it that has to do with the rules and regulations and unfunded mandates. They will, like a few years back, they wanted cameras in every single special ed classroom, for example. Okay, so we have cameras in every special ed classroom. If a parent requests, that's fine. It's transparency, et cetera. But the problem is you have to hold that film. Holding film is very expensive. And so, so that's just caused an unfunded mandate. So that's just more money we have to spend out of that M&O dollar to figure out how to, store our, unless we could keep the storage for so many, unless we can put it in bond in some way. But so anyway, the legislature affects us very much. And so after the legislature is over in May, then the next 6 months, they will, or to a year and a half, they will spend translating whatever happened to reality. So that's when the Commissioner of Education gets involved and the Texas Education Agency gets involved to translate what what law was passed.
For those of you who want to learn more about what Tracy's talking about, you mentioned we can go on the website, the legislative website, which is for, is it on the Coppell ISD website or?
There is a place called TexansForStrongPublicSchools.org. And that is a website you can go to. It's a TASB support website. They put out, you can register or you can go there and look and you can sign up to send letters or whatever to help support the things that you care about just by clicking on a button.
To know that this session is on Facebook Live as well. And we do have some people watching it on Facebook Live. So there is one question here for you, Tracy,
okay.
That we as parents impact what is happening at Hill? Like, can we contribute towards it?
I'll tell you, we are really looking at how to better, the board is looking at, in fact, the three of us that are on our legislative committee, Nicole Bentley, Lee Walker, and myself, we are very passionately motivated to engage our community on how to get actively involved in this work. And, a lot of it is email, phone calls. When they get email and phone calls, it's a big deal because usually the only people that call are the lobbyists. So you just need to be armed with what is it that you need to be calling about. And what I would tell you is that Texas for Strong Public Schools, there's some meat there that you can use to call on if it's passionate to you. You can look and see what the letters say and you can decide for yourself. But besides writing a letter, you can call them about that topic. So you can just look at the letter, see what it says and understand it or not. And please, you can always reach out to me. I can talk about this stuff all day long. It is so important. We used to have representation in our community that did not support public schools. We don't anymore. Now we have two people that represent our community that are very much for public schools. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't call. And that doesn't mean we can't call the head of the education committee and whatever and complain about this, or the lieutenant governor and say, what do you mean you've got a priority to do this? I'm not voting for you anymore. I mean, you can be a real benefit by just understanding an issue and then just going after it. I mean, I know as parents, boy, nobody messes with our kids, right? Nobody should mess with your schools either. I mean, if we could engage parents more, it would be a whole different legislative session every day.
Question comes from a parent who has a son is a kindergartner at Canyon Ranch, and what she wants to know is about the LEAP program. Okay. The LEAP program apparently is offered as CFB-ISD, which is the Carrollton Farmers Branch ISD, and for students even outside their district. So apparently a lot of kids are going through that program that are in Coppell ISD as well. Apparently it's a project-based learning program, and she mentions that it's also offered at Pinkerton. I know that parent is here today as well, so thank you for that question. And the question, I guess, is, does our district offer such an advanced academic service such as this, and is it possible to introduce it to our district?
So the LEAP program has been around for a long, long time. I had a child that was identified gifted in kindergarten, and he's 27 now. It's been there a long time. The LEAP program is actually it is where the state of Texas requires you to serve identified gifted kids. That service could range from all kinds of things. In Coppell, well, in Carrollton, they have a campus that's dedicated to gifted, and that's the LEAP program, basically. They do project-based learning. We do project-based learning as well. It's just they couch it as LEAP. Half of their school, I don't know what the percentage is now, but part of their school is gifted and part of their school is regular kids, from what I understand, or at least that's the way it used to be. I serve right now in the Commissioners Council for Gifted. And so they just did a state plan for the gifted. They changed that. And so it looks similar to the way it used to look, but basically any program that serves gifted kids should have the Texas state plan for the gifted as their benchmark. That should be how they serve kids. Now, it doesn't tell you exactly how to do it. You can do it in a lot of different ways. Some pull out kids. Some have full campus. We do know in Coppell, we've been training a lot of educators on gifted strategies, things like differentiation. Differentiation is a gifted strategy. Problem-based learning is definitely, a gifted strategy. So as I said earlier, the strategies that work on gifted kids work on all kids. It's just the depth and complexity of the strategy, or whatever that looks like. So for example, so I've had a lot of experience with gifted, and what I would tell you is what's key for gifted learning is to not have a ceiling in your learning experience. When my kid was in elementary school, they pulled him out once or twice a week, depending on the grade he was in. And he went someplace and he did some stuff, and then he came back to his class and had to be a normal kid again. What we've done over the years in Coppell, and every campus has a gifted coordinator, GTI specialist. What we've done in Coppell is we more mirrored the response to intervention strategies, which is you've got different levels of need. So if you think about a bell curve, an average, there's really not such a thing as an average kid, because how could you be an average person? We're just too complex. But say an average performer was in the middle, and then you have, I don't know if I'm going the right way or not, but on one end, you've got the spectrum of, you've got some kids that may have more learning disabilities or whatever, but it's more complex than that, because you can have gifted kids that have learning disabilities. In fact, that's called twice exceptional. So you may have a dyslexic child who is, and dysgraphic child who actually is super bright and isn't even identified as dyslexic or dysgraphic until they're 6th grade. That actually happened to one of my kids. So, but I guess getting back to the idea is, what we do is we want our classroom to be a place where every child doesn't have a ceiling. And so our GTI specialists work with those campus teachers to best serve the needs of every child. And so we have a lot of data. We have map data, and we know where our kids are growing. And every child has the expectation that every child will grow every year, at least a year, if not more, depending on the child. And so for the kids that can't get enough in that class, if they need more, and sometimes that's working a little bit with their intellectual peers, perhaps, they might need to be pulled out. There might be some other strategies for those kids. There might be some social emotional strategies for those kids, because gifted children are often very asynchronous in their development, probably more so than there is not a normal child. I'm just saying they're each different. But a normal child, or normally, or what we think is normal, is you kind of mature at a similar, you're a first grade level reader, you're a first grade level math, you're a first, they're not all like, there's a range. But a gifted kid, you could be in second grade and ninth grade reading level, but be a 2-year-old when it comes to your behavior, because you don't know how to handle your emotions. Something about, you can tell a gifted kid, they're the kid that may or may not raise their hand when they blurt out the answer, right? They're annoying sometimes. They're, and it's a maturity thing. I mean, there are lots of kids that are annoying until they're compliant and obedient, right? But that's really not what we want. We want kids to be curious, and we want to work within that. So these kids may need some extra help with social emotional things, right? Because it gets frustrating when you understand things and you don't understand why people aren't as excited as you with all those dinosaur things that they know about. And let me tell you all about it. And their friends are like, I don't really care about dinosaurs. I just want to know who's going to kick the ball over there or whatever. So it's very complex. So what we've done in Capel is try to make sure that we are serving the needs of every child where they are. And so I'm just so proud of what we do.
Now, this is definitely a very important topic for a lot of parents, because it's, from what you're saying, it sounds like the gifted program doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, I want my child to be in a program because I feel that they're super intelligent, or if they're not in the program, they're not up to par. So a lot of parents feel that stress, because from what you just said, it's evident that, being in a gifted program doesn't necessarily mean it's more than just academics. It's more than just intelligent. Like you mentioned, that there are kids that have disabilities and they have that, gift to hone in on something, or expand on, or tap into something that other kids may not be able to. So there's no such thing as regular, irregular, disability or anything like that. All kids are different in their own way, and they learn differently. Right. So that's what I really wanted you to touch on, because a lot of parents, and this is one of the Basu's here on our call today. And, I know what this question comes from her, that there are a lot of debates going on with the GT program, and that's creating an inequality among parents. Like, oh, well, my kid's in the GT program and I'm, proud about that. And, and then that kind of makes the other parent feel like, oh, why are my kid not in the GT program? What can I do? Is there an exam for it? Can they study for it? How can I make them, be and push them be better?
Yeah. It's the essence of a child. It's the child's essence, and they're all different. We're not talking about, washers or screws or nuts or bolts. We're talking about children, and they're all different. And processing skills. I mean, dyslexic people, there are tons of examples of dyslexia. Albert Einstein was dyslexic. There are so many examples of dyslexic people that are just, we just have to get out of their way, right? It's so important for kids to feel confident in what they're working on and be the best them. And a lot of the stuff that's done with the state, with these standardized tests, it compares, and those things compare and rank children. Who cares? Why do we care if that they're developmentally different and at every stage of their lives? And there are benefits and there are opportunities for every child. And so really, as a parent, I mean, you're their best advocate, you know them best. Give them some time to pursue stuff they really enjoy, or figure out what it is they enjoy. During this pandemic, everybody's talking about, oh, they're going to be so far behind. My goodness, everybody in the whole country will be. I mean, it's not like, what? This is ridiculous. It's unfinished learning. It doesn't mean they have to learn that thing. They can learn something different. It can be designed differently. What you want them to do when they graduate from high school is to have agency, to be able to go out and, hey, be curious about something. You don't want them showing up at college and saying, what's going to be on the test? Who cares what's on the test? Let me pursue something I'm really interested in and curious about. And if they have an experience in school, K-12, and I want them to have lots of things. Our mission statement's about providing opportunities for deep, profound learning, right? You're not going to get that from a spreadsheet, a worksheet. You're not going to get that from that. Deep, profound learning shifts your thinking. It makes you wonder. It makes you question answers instead of just answer questions. And so if you're equipped to learn when you leave school, you've got something you did while you were in school, whether it was your solar car project or and hopefully it'll be something exciting in math or in whatever subject you're into. You go forth and you can apply those skills you learned at pursuing that to anything. And that will make you be successful. So comparing kids, and I know when my kid was identified gifted, I'll never forget, this woman came up to me and said, "What, did he get in? Did he get in?" And I'm like, "What?" And I didn't even want to tell her. And I finally said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, that's because he had the good teacher." And I just went, whatever.
I cannot tell you how many of parents are out there like that, is because they like, oh, because you had a good teacher or was a bad teacher, because of that bad teacher, my kid could have done much better and he didn't have the opportunity to. So in a nutshell, what would be your one piece of advice to parents on this whole gifted program thing? Because there are a lot of parents here that want to know, what can I do to get them in there? What do they need to do, learn, and what can I do differently?
Love your kid, love where they are, hug your kid, know that if they're in Coppell ISD, they're going to get what they need to be successful. And you know what, I tell you, and I've been to a lot of school districts. I'm a master trustee, so I've toured school districts all over the state, and I've seen all kinds of different programs. Nobody does it as well as we do it here. And that's really why I stay. The reason I ran for school board was to support this work that we do here.
Absolutely. And that's why a lot of us want to be in Coppell ISD. We want, because we've heard so much about the district and all the schools here, and people are buying houses just because it's Coppell ISD. The house prices have gone up.
I know.
Because it's Coppell ISD. So a lot of parents are like, well, I'm paying so much school taxes and, they feel like I'm not getting what I need. Our children are not, they're not getting what they need, and so on and so forth. So what would be that one advice that you have for those parents, who feel that way?
So if I guess my advice would be, get involved in your school. Get involved in your school, and not just in the classroom trying to find out, not just with a teacher. Get involved in your school district. Read information, look around, see what's going on here. Don't get caught up in all this stuff. I don't know if this is helping. When you talk about taxes,
it is.
I just pulled up on our website. We've got so much information on our website. I just pulled up Dallas, the county taxes, rates the total tax rate to the lowest, highest to the lowest. So for example, Lovejoy ISD has the highest tax rate in the North Texas area. Then you go on down, you see DeSoto, Crowley, Blue Ridge, Wiley, Lake Worth, Grand Prairie. These aren't school districts that you think about, "Ooh, why don't I go there?" The tax rate really doesn't have a whole lot to do with, and that's what school boards can approve or pass. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with the district. It has the district, how long they've been around, what if they've got new growth. Those things are the things that drive the tax rate. Typically the bond money that needs new buildings and things like that. Coppell is 44th out of this list, 57 of them. I guess it only has one page. And we're 44th out of 57. Below us even is Highland Park. Highland Park's tax rate is really low, but now here's the trade-off. Highland Park, Coppell, Southlake, Lovejoy, all these different school districts have very high taxes because their property values are high. And the property values are high because they have good schools. And what I tell you, I wouldn't because I've seen all this, I mean, I've been around, I've seen lots of schools. I wouldn't trade a Coppell school for any campus in this area. And I especially wouldn't trade, you know, Canyon Ranch. I mean, please, we have excellent facilities throughout the district, and we have top-notch teachers that care about kids, and that's what you want. And so I would say, if you're paying taxes in Coppell for those schools, you make sure you're going to those schools, because you'll benefit from that and your kids will benefit from that.
Charter schools versus public schools, okay? So this question is related to why parents want to send their children to charter schools and prefer that over public, okay? And how does that affect the public education system versus sending kids to a chartered school? And I know a lot of families, you know, my social friend circles as well, like they want to send their kids to Great Hearts, which is here in Irving, and also Universal Academy is another one. And I could never understand why. And why do you want to send your kids there when we have such a great, you know, Coppell ISD here? Why?
Okay, great question. And I'm a good person to answer that question, and I'll explain that. For me, the first thing is every parent is the decision maker with respect to what school a kid goes to. You make those decisions as a parent, and that is your decision. And I respect anybody's decision to do whatever they want to do for their child. Okay, so let me just back up and say, when my oldest child was in second grade, back in the day, we were test prepping a kid in first grade for a third grade reading test and a third grade math test. In all of our schools, that's what we did. That's what all the schools did in Texas, because standardized tests had really picked up and everybody was trying to make sure everybody passed their standardized tests. Well, I saw my kid hating school, just hated it. Who wants to sit taking test prep for something you're going to do in third grade? So I looked around, and at the time, the North Hills School was 5th, 6th, 7th grades, and then it dropped down to 1st, and it went up to 12th. That year, a friend of mine said that she had heard that it was a really good school. And so I said, okay. It was February, in the middle of the school year. I called them. They said, well, we don't really, you can get in our lottery for next year, whatever. And I said, okay, well, what about now? Do you have any openings? And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we have an opening. And I said, okay, we're bringing him. So I moved him in the middle of February over to North Hills. And what I would tell you my experience was, or our experience was, and then the next year I moved his little brother over because his brother was there, right? Thought I was doing a great thing. And I got real involved in their volunteer organization. I was running their volunteer organization, of course. And so I know all about charter schools. They weren't very old. There weren't many of them. North Hills was the only Uplift campus at that time. And now they've expanded. I think they have 21 campuses in North Texas. George P. Bush was on their board in Fort Worth. And so I've even been to board meetings, charter board meetings. And what I will tell you is typically the state kicks in about $1,100 more per student for these charter schools. So they get a little extra money from the state. What they don't get is they don't get the money locally, right? They don't really get, most of that money is coming from the state. So they may or may not get more, but they end up more from the state, less from the local. So basically what happens to the local district is when your kid goes over to that charter school, the money follows that kid. So the school district you left doesn't get the money for that kid any longer. Makes sense, right? Except for you're running your school district, expecting kids to be there, they're not there. Coppell doesn't have as much of a problem with this as other districts do, but Coppell has a much bigger problem with this than we used to the tune of last year, there were $5 million worth of students going out of our district Now, right now, we have a $7.2 million budget deficit. We knew we passed that way. We knew we were in a pandemic. We were not going to start cutting staff and all of that. We didn't know what we were going to see. And so we kept our staff because we knew it was going to be all hands on deck this year. And we're so glad we did. But that $5 million in revenue, keeping those kids, it might cost a little bit more to educate them because they would be at different grade levels and they could be sprinkled in throughout your schools. So it's not like you're adding, 400 teachers with, or whatever, not 400, but 40 teachers. You wouldn't add that many to take some more because we have economies of scale, right? So, so that is hurting Capel now. And it really, I don't think we ever really looked at that. We've never been in the situation with this school choice where charters have impacted us. When charters first formed, they were formed to help in lower socioeconomic areas, kids that had failing schools. Charters now are going into, we've got 2 charters in the city of Capel. Now, 99% of the kids don't go to those charters that are in Capel, but they bus them in from other areas, but still some do. And so they are putting charter schools everywhere. Charter schools have become a gold rush in Texas. IDEA, you probably heard their commercials. They advertise on the Super Bowl. They advertise on Saturday Night Live. They advertise on big events. They spend a lot of money in marketing. These schools, these charter schools, are located in Virginia, in California, in Florida, other places, not in Texas. So all our taxpayer money is going to these other states, and these boards are there, and there's no transparency. We don't know how they're spending their money. We do know they're spending a lot on advertising. The Commissioner of Education that I talked about before has full custody of charters. He can decide everything for a charter himself. He doesn't need anybody else to help him do it. The State Board of Education has to make decisions about school districts, ISDs. So therefore, there's some control with the state and elected people that are responsible to constituents there. The commissioner is an appointed position by the governor. And so the governor's priority is to expand charters and privatization, which is what charters are. They're putting taxpayer money into for-profit schools. So I pulled my kids out, and my kids were there for 4 years at North Hills. And what I found out was that, at least for North Hills, that school began because the kids in the Hackberry Creek area didn't want to have to go to that school over there in Carrollton's Farmers Branch that had those kids in it. That's why it started. It started in 5th grade. They came from Las Colinas Elementary. They went there, 5th and 6th grade, and then it went from there. So my kid that was there in 2nd grade, when he got to 5th grade, that's where they had a big influx of kids. They brought in a bunch of kids. So they had a few kids here. They were doing some good things with these kids in terms of their academics. They were rotating them around according to their abilities, which helps a lot when you're studying. It was a flexible rotation. So you might get a new concept of math you weren't as strong about. So they might put you in this level and then they might move you again, or you might stay there, whatever. The kids didn't see it. They just knew they were going to work in a different class. It was fun to see different kids. They didn't know about any of that. But when they got to 5th grade, they didn't divide them up anymore. They just treated them all the same. And the kids in 5th grade, as they're developing their little brains, are a little bit of a, they're a different kind of, that's a different time for a kid. They're developmentally, they're, middle school is hard. And so I just watched crazy stuff happen because kids were now, it was a bunch of animals, I don't mean animals, but it was, the kids were in charge of the prison kind of thing. So we pulled him out. He got into Capel. He got into the band program. He was a percussionist. He ended up doing 5 years of drum corps. I mean, this was his passion that he really got into. And then he did as much advanced academics as he could, but he blossomed. And it was because of opportunity. The thing about charter schools, they're all about academics, but the extracurriculars, the other part of school, the social emotional, the project-based learning, let's move into the 21st century, That's not happening. They were set up to be innovative places that wouldn't have as much, they wouldn't have as many rules, that they could do creative things, but they've just become old school places, right? So if we want to be trapped in where I went to school, then go to a charter school. You can go on the TEA website and look and see how charter schools are performing. By and large, charter schools are underperforming public schools across the state. They aren't better schools. And if you can get one for a better time for a bit, that's great. The other problem is they don't have certified qualified teachers. A lot of times they're the parents of the kids that go to the school. And those teachers don't stick around. You don't have a lot of long-term, the average, tenure in Capel, the average tenure is 10 years for a teacher. Now that's gone down a little bit as COVID's hit and older teachers have retired early, but that is pretty typical. Normally 5 years is the average but in Capel, we have about a 10-year, or at least it's probably between 9 and 10 now. It could be 8, but it's higher. You're going to get a better quality teacher. You're going to get a better performing school. And it's not just about a STAR test. Those charter schools are all over those STAR tests, right? They hang their hats on that. And if they've got a good charter school that focuses on STAR test, that is not the kind of school I want my kid to go to.
Question from a parent who's curious about truancy law. Okay, this is related to truancy law for a lot of. So the question is, we've heard a lot of people homeschooling their children and attending private schools, and it is our understanding that these children are exempt from attending public schools. So the question is related to the children that are homeschooled. So how do they get that social and emotional interaction, that they get in a public school setting, and it's fulfilled? How is that fulfilled through this particular method? And do the parents that are homeschooling their children, are they certified by state in order to be able to do that, to homeschool their children? And lastly, what is the reason that parents choose that particular method?
So I think during a pandemic, things are a little different because there are a lot of people homeschooling right now, and we're in Capel that we've lost kids this year have been in pre-K and kinder. They're a little bit easier to work with because really, kindergarten is really supposed to be about play. And we've turned it into let's make sure they can read in kindergarten, and that developmentally is really may not be appropriate. And for different kids, it may be earlier, and for different kids, it may be later. But so kinder and pre-K, they're important to start in a public school because we do have high quality school. But as a homeschool, in Texas, you have the right as a parent to do whatever you want with your kids. Basically, it's parent choice, right? As a parent, you can decide if your kids never take the STAR exam, except for in high school when they have to pass at least 3 end of course exams. But really, you can say, no, I don't want my kid doing this. And this year, with there not being any stakes with it, like in 5th grade, there are certain places where you can't move on in your grade if you can't pass the test. This year, all that's waived, so it doesn't even matter. I mean, so this year is a year, if you want to skip that STAR test, you can do it. Just don't go to school, because I think they're going to be online at school. And if you're remote, you probably would have an issue with sending your kid to school for a STAR test when they're doing remote learning the rest of the time, because you're worried about your multi-generational family and somebody getting sick. So back to it. I just think that homeschool is a personal decision. You don't have to be high quality. The state has tried to pass vouchers in the past, which would allow a parent to get the money for themselves and teach their kids, supposedly. I mean, it's not probably great for the kid. Now, there are some teachers that homeschool their kids because they're not satisfied with the schools that they're in. Um,
Really interesting because, I thought, I mean, definitely that obviously is a choice. I just, I guess some of the parents were really curious, like why you have a public school, it didn't cost, I mean, you're paying school taxes anyway.
Everybody pays school taxes,
And
right?
why not just send them there and, rather than, and it's hard. It takes very special people to be able to do that. I had a neighbor with 5 children and she homeschooled all of them.
Mm.
And so that social and emotional, interaction is not there for those children. And is that perhaps a consequence that later on down their lives that they may face?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can get social emotional abilities from being inside your own family. I mean, you don't have to be with 4 million other people, but as you get older, you're going to go into the world and you want to be able to function with a lot of, I know there are homeschoolers that will homeschool until 8th grade and then they'll move them to the high school. That's pretty rude awakening to show up at the high school with all those kids, but there are folks that do that. The other thing is sometimes homeschool networks get together. So a bunch of different homeschoolers will get together and pool their resources and have extra things that they do, and they have flexibility during the day. They can go to the arboretum or to the museum or whatever with a bunch of kids and they can get some social emotional there. But what I would tell you is there's nothing as good as a high qualified teacher. And the teachers in Coppell are just excellent. And if you're going to homeschool, I wouldn't live in Coppell. I'd move, someplace where your property values weren't quite as high.